We turn now to the pandemic. This week, the nation passed an unthinkable milestone. More than 500,000 Americans have died from the virus. But President Biden also announced yesterday that more than 50 million doses of the vaccine have been administered since he took office. And the FDA looks poised to approve the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which would only take one shot to be effective. Biden said up to 4 million doses will be released as early as next week. Errin, it's hard to fathom the idea that we have lost 500,000 people in just a year's time. That's more Americans dying in that time than we saw on the battlefields of World War I, World War II, and Vietnam combined. How would you say the president handled that this week with his moment of silence? How different is that than we saw in the previous president?
Oh, Peter, it was a huge departure. I mean, the president obviously is somebody who is known as someone who has experienced so much personal tragedy and is able to translate that into really helping people deal with grief collectively, making them feel as if he understands and empathizes with what they're going through. And that is something that we didn't see as the pandemic raged across this country last year, taking first thousands, then tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands of lives. And most of us were in our homes kind of dealing with this pandemic individually and in isolation. And President Biden and Vice President Harris and their spouses standing out there, with those candles, acknowledging to the country that this happened, like leaving a record of this and letting people know that they were not alone, I think was a very powerful balm that I think a lot of Americans were looking for. It was powerful not just for those families, but for the tens of thousands of healthcare workers across this country that have been responding to this crisis and are dealing with their own trauma from this. And so, I think the president trying to kind of restore the spirit that I think that we had at the beginning of this, almost a year ago now, that we're all in this together, is what the messaging has been around their first month or so in office, not only in terms of all of our fellow citizens that we have lost, but also in terms of the rollout and getting through what maybe is the darkest period of this pandemic and looking ahead towards what may be our new normal finally.
Susan, of course, empathy is one thing, but tangible aid is another. The House is poised to pass President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID aid package in the next few hours or day. But what about the Senate? We've got a 50-50 Senate there. What does the White House and Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, think about the prospects of getting any Republican support? And if they're not going to get any, do they have all their Democrats lined up for a very narrow victory?
The irony here is that a lot of Democrats were upset this week when the Senate parliamentarian ruled that a $15 minimum wage increase could not be part of this package because it wouldn't fall in line with the budget rules that Democrats are using to pass this with just 50 votes. Now, obviously, that really angered progressives and the left because this has been a huge priority for them. But the irony here is it might have made it easier to get this bill through the Senate. There had been some opposition, or at least some reluctance, from more moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, who weren't on board for this minimum wage thing entirely. If the Senate has to take it out, and they do now, it makes it a lot easier. And otherwise, those specific Democrats in particular have been indicating that they're likely going to vote for it. It does look like this is heading towards a 50-50 vote. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, who's been in this mix of maybe could they be a Republican senator, she essentially said this week that she doesn't see any Republicans inclined to support it. It's too big, it's too expensive, and a lot of Republicans see that this isn't really about COVID relief. It's about advancing a lot of Democratic policies that they've been trying to do for a long, long time. So the idea that it's going to be bipartisan in the Senate doesn't seem likely. Kamala Harris, the vice president, is probably going to have to go up and break that tie vote. But I think Democrats look at this bipartisanship as what does the country think? And if you look at polling for how people feel about what's in this bill, the stimulus checks, more unemployment insurance, new child tax credits for parents that could get monthly payments, it's really popular. So I think Democrats are looking at bipartisanship through a different spectrum. It doesn't necessarily mean getting Republican votes in this case. I think they look at it as doing things that 60-70% of the country think is a pretty good idea.
Ashley, what about that minimum wage increase? Is the White House going to give up on that then, or what is his path toward finding a different way to pass that?
So they have a number of options. Some of the ones that the progressives would want, such as firing the parliamentarian or overruling the parliamentarian. The White House has signaled that they are not interested in doing that. They are going to respect the process. And it's unclear they would even have the ability to do that because of some of the reticence from their more moderate members that Susan just mentioned. Now, there's talk we're hearing already of, is there a different way to rewrite this a bit or tweak it so it does not violate the strict budget rules to pass this through reconciliation? So, for instance, something that would not actually raise the minimum wage to $15, but that would penalize companies that do not pay their employees a $15 minimum wage, or incentivize companies to do so, is something under discussion. And the big question is going to be, the House is going to pass it with that $15 minimum wage. It is not going to make it through in the Senate because of the parliamentarian ruling. And so when it goes back to the House, what are those progressives going to do? Are they going to sort of hold their nose and vote for this, even though it doesn't have one of their key priorities? That's something that is going to be of interest for the progressives. And of course, the Biden administration has not given up on it entirely at all. It just may have to be passed in a different way, or a standalone bill, which could be, of course, far more difficult to do.
Susan, we have just 30 seconds left, but what's the Republican argument against the minimum wage increase?
You know, it's a really complicated question. I think it's more traditional old school Republicanism, right? That the free market should decide, the companies should be able to decide. But it gets complicated, I think, in this modern era. You look at a state like Florida that Donald Trump won handily, and they passed the minimum wage as a referendum by a majority of voters there. So it's one of those issues that really does blend party lines. And I'm not sure, again, if you look at the public likes this minimum wage increase, and the Republican Party is trying to become more of a party of working class voters. So I think there might have to be some of these shifting alignments on issues like this.